Hi everybody, Mark here from pondalgaesolutions.com, and as promised in this video I want to talk a little more about beneficial bacteria and how to use this in your pond to help with managing nutrients that can feed algae growth. This video was actually prompted by a comment that came in, a comment and question that came in from a video we did about a month ago concerning the 5 myths about pond algae control. And the topic of that video included a couple of myths that I had not talked about before, and one of those was that beneficial bacteria can help remove phosphorus from a pond. That's a myth, so I wanted to mention that, and I went on to explain that the only 2 ways you can actually get phosphorus out of a pond. And for those that don't know, phosphorus is a main driving force or nutrient behind most algae growth. Nitrogen is another player in this, but typically phosphorus is considered the limiting factor. If phosphorus is high, you can often see a lot of growth. If it's low but nitrogen is high, sometimes algae still doesn't grow that well. So phosphorus was the main focus on that discussion. And I suggested that the only way that you can get phosphorus out of a pond is either physically removing the plants that hold it, meaning that when plants are thriving, like algae, maybe duckweed too, when you remove the plant matter or the biomass from the pond, you also remove the nutrients that it's holding within it. I also suggested that muck removal, dredging, is another way that you can remove these nutrients physically from the pond. But beyond that, that's about the only 2 ways you can actually take them out. And so that led to this comment, which I think is fantastic, and it leads into another deeper discussion, or can lead us into another deeper discussion on how bacteria is actually working in a pond, and we can clarify that, and I think it's well worth the time to do so. Okay, this is a quote or a message that was sent in from Matthew out of Canada following that video that I mentioned. And he said, "I found your comments about phosphorus rather depressing. You either dredge it up or lock it out in the sediment. Most have large ponds and dredging is not practical, and I'd like to discuss muck pellets and would appreciate your thoughts. The measurements I'm mentioning are mine, but I know of similar experiences when you add muck pellets coupled with bottom-up aeration and have a foot of muck that is now 8 inches and 3 to 4 inches of muck that is now essentially visible sand, gravel, and larger stones. Doesn't logic tell you that the amount of phosphorus embedded in the first example is less and essentially gone in the second? I don't think sand and gravel harbor a significant amount of phosphorus." So this is an excellent comment, excellent question, and I appreciate you sending it in, Matthew. It hits on a lot of points, and I hope I can be succinct with this in my response. First of all, I want to say congratulations to you for the good work that you've done with the muck and the persistence and consistency that it takes in using these muck digesting products. This is not a fast process. It's not a quick fix. And so it takes some diligence to make the headway that you've done. It is good work that you're doing, and I'll explain why in my comments here. But good work here. And this is not anything to get too depressed about, in my opinion, because what we're talking about is some fundamental things in the construction of all living things. It's a big story, right? When we, when we talk about phosphorus and nitrogen, we use the term nutrients. That's how everybody uses them. And in effect, you'll see them used in fertilizers and all kinds of things to help stimulate plant growth. That's all true. So they would seem to be nutrients. But we also say, and I've used the terms too, that when we use beneficial bacteria to lower nutrients in the water column or to lower nutrients that feed algae growth, we can affect the blooms. And that's true. But it makes it sound, in a way, or gives the perception that we're actually using microbes to remove phosphorus and nitrogen from the pond. That somehow they burn through it like a fuel source. But that's not what's really happening. The key is to remember that phosphorus and nitrogen are first and foremost elements, fundamental elements to the very building blocks of all life. Life wouldn't exist without them. It wouldn't exist without the other key elements like sulfur and hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. And so you need these things for all life to, first of all, start, but also to persist. So think of it that way, and then keep in mind that the beauty of this whole natural design is that when it comes to phosphorus and nitrogen, they're not depleted, they're not depletable, they're renewable, they're recyclable. In nature, they are moved around and relocated and used again and again and again to stimulate new life. You know, if I go into the woods and I die and I'm not found and I'm just allowed to go back to nature, so to speak, the nutrients within my body at the time of my passing will ultimately go back into the environment that we're in. And those nutrients will be taken up by other things to help sustain their life, be it plants or whatever. And so the phosphorus and nitrogen that are in our world today, and we're not talking about the million-year picture, but in the world today, phosphorus and nitrogen, it is a true renewable resource. It's not a something that is depleted or in effect created, and it's not destroyed. It's simply reused again and again and again by different life forms in various processes. So if we think of it that way in a pond environment, what's actually happening? I mean, the truth is, what's the bacteria actually doing? And what happens when it helps with algae growth? Well, both plants and bacteria are not using phosphorus and nitrogen for fuel per se. They both use phosphorus and nitrogen as building blocks to help their cellular structure. Their DNA and RNA is constructed with it. You know, structurally, you can dig into this even more about how plants and bacteria use these elements to grow, but in effect, they're both using them for the same things, to build their cellular structures. And the more of these elements that are in the environment, the better they can build out or grow. So phosphorus is really talked about a lot as the limiting factor for algae growth, which is why I focused on that in my original discussion. When phosphorus is high, you can get a lot of growth, and when it's low, but nitrogen is fairly abundant, you still may not see a lot of algae. So what it comes down to is that when you either have beneficial bacteria in a pond that is well supported, and that's a very critical thing to keep in mind, or you supplement bacteria in, you are cross-competing against that algae for those elements or nutrients in the water. And they can often do a pretty good job of that. So, you know, when you use a microbial in a pond, you're never killing anything. You're simply changing the environment, or in effect, where phosphorus and nitrogen are being held. And I think that's the simplest way to look at it. When a plant dies, or when a bacteria dies, or when you digest muck, which also holds phosphorus and nitrogen, in all of these cases, the phosphorus and nitrogen are not removed. They're basically released back into the water column. They still remain in the pond. So this sounds like a real problem. It sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually not. It's nature's way to sustain life. Now, the key with this is, and the crucial role that bacteria can play in this, is that when you have a healthy population of beneficial bacteria in a pond environment, and they are thriving, and they have the things that they need to sustain a vital life, you know, a life with vitality. What are those things? Well, good oxygen. That's why we talk about aeration so much. They need temperatures typically that are above 55 to 60 degrees. Otherwise, they go into a spore form. When things warm up, they're constantly sensing the environment around them. When things warm up, they start to come out and become active bacteria. They also need reasonable mineralization, alkalinity and hardness that's not too low and not too high, pH that's not too low, not too high. And with these things, they can thrive. And when they do, they serve as a buffer against potential algae growth, for one thing, because they're constantly bringing in these nutrients and sequestering them during their life. And even though they die, and when they die, they release the nutrients back into the water, as long as the environment is supportive of new bacteria coming along, when they die, they also release spores of more bacteria that, when the conditions are right, they come out and they become active bacteria, which then take in the nutrients once again and sequester them. So you have this repeating process of give and take in the environment. And we've seen it many times when the bacteria are doing their work, and when they're supported well, they can help curb or reduce algae blooms. And again, they're not killing anything, they're just sequestering those nutrients. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and this is why your work on the muck is so important. So yes, when you break this muck down with biologics, the phosphorus and nitrogen within that muck is released into the water column. But here's a really important thing. When you continue to work that muck down, although it does contain and hold phosphorus and nitrogen to some extent, there is a constant leaching of these nutrients out of muck. Even when it's oxygenated, it will lose some of that into the water column, slowly releasing it. When you aerate and you increase oxygen low in a pond, though, you get an oxidation of any iron that's down in muck or in sediment, and that iron will bind to phosphorus. It will actively bind it up and hold it. Without oxygen in a pond, or good oxygen levels low in the pond, the reverse is true. The phosphorus is leaching out even more. Interestingly, a lot of studies have been done on sediment over the years, and I'll put a graph up in a moment which will show the overall, and this is a compilation from a number of studies. It's not exact numbers, but it shows the overall view of this. But you will see that muck has a fairly moderate binding capacity, but as you start to expose natural sediment through the work that you're doing, when you get to sand, and especially clay and rock, you will find the binding capability, the intensity of the binding of the phosphorus is much higher. And so in both these cases, although phosphorus and nitrogen are released back into the pond water or into the water column when muck is reduced, you actually get a better binding of it at the sediment level ultimately if a pond is oxygenated well and the sediment is exposed. So the work that you're doing there is good. But keep in mind, in both these cases, we're not removing phosphorus and nitrogen from the pond. We're simply sequestering it. We're relocating it. So in places that algae can't use it. And that is how beneficial bacteria in its various forms can help to work against algae in a pond environment. It doesn't work the way some people think, and I understand that. The terminology doesn't take it far enough the way we use it when we say we want to reduce nutrients that feed algae. But what we're really doing is just what nature does, and that is sequestering it, reallocating it, and putting it in places that the plant can't use. At any rate, Matthew, thank you for this comment, and I hope this video does justice to provide some kind of an answer to it. It's a big, broad picture story here that I'm not sure if we've really encapsulated well, but at any rate, I hope that's helpful for you. Again, thank you. And if you have questions about your pond, need help with anything, reach out to me. Again, my name is Mark. You can find me at pondalgaesolutions.com, and I hope you all have a great day wherever you are.